So this is a video on complex numbers, and complex numbers are actually kind of neat. And here's what happens. The real numbers are a union of the rational and the irrational numbers, and complex numbers don't actually fit into those two groups, which means it's not actually a real number. So how do we get complex numbers? Well, let's take a look at this. If I had x squared equals 4, I could take the square root of both sides, and you get this, and then you end up with plus or minus 2. And what happens is, when I plug positive 2 into x squared, I get 4, and if I plug negative 2 into x squared, I get 4, and that's great. But if I had something like this, x squared equals a negative 4, I can't do the same thing. I can't just do this and say, oh, it's going to be x equals plus or minus negative 2, because that would just be the same as plus or minus 2. But when you plug those values in, you don't get the same thing. Now, what does happen is, I think you'll recall, if I had something like square root of 40, you'll recall that that's the same as square root of 4 and square root of 10. So radical 4, radical 10, you get 2 radical 10. Well, if I have something like this, square root of a negative 4, I could change it into the square root of a negative 1 and the square root of 4. Now, here's how you get a complex number. Radical negative 1 is equal to I, and that's it. The square root of 4 is 2, so here I get the complex number 2i. This, because it's just 2i, is called a pure imaginary number. And the reason why it's a pure imaginary number is because complex numbers usually consist of a real part and an imaginary part. And I'll give you an example. Imaginary. So I'll give you an example. 6 minus 2i. The real part is 6. The imaginary part is negative 2i. Another example. 4 plus 5i. Here's the real part. Here's the imaginary part. Alright, so what I wanted to show you was this. You can also do, I also want you to realize that if the square root of negative 1 equals I, then the square root of negative 1 squared would equal I squared. But what is the square root of negative 1 squared? It would just equal negative 1. So I'm going to rewrite this a little bit over here, make it a little bit clearer. I do recommend watching this video twice because it's a little bit weird. So I'm going to say that I to the first equals I. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But I just said that I squared equals negative 1. I cubed, I'm going to do some work down here, is equal to I squared times I to the first. But I squared is negative 1, and I to the first is I, so I cubed really equals negative 1 times I, which is a negative I. And I to the fourth is really I squared times I squared, which means negative 1 times negative 1, which is a positive 1. If you go back to I to the fifth, that's going to be equal to I to the fourth, which is 1, times I to the first, which is I. I to the sixth will equal I to the fourth times I squared, which is 1 times a negative 1. I to the seventh is 1 times negative I. I to the eighth equals 1. So I want you to see there's a pattern here. And just in case you're wondering, I to the 0 still equals 1, but that makes sense because the pattern would go backwards. And you can actually plot this on a coordinate plane, but the coordinate plane for imaginary numbers is a little bit weird. This is your real part, your real axis, which is normally your x, and this is your imaginary axis. So I have 1, I, negative 1, and negative I. And check this out. I to the first is 1, I squared, I cubed, I to the fourth, I to the fifth, I to the sixth, I to the seventh, I to the eighth, and it just goes around. So if I had I to the 50th, I could say, well, I want to divide 50 by 4, and I get I to the 48th with a remainder of 2. And the reason why is because I know 48 is divisible by 4, so it goes around 12 times. I get back to here. One more, two more, I get I squared, which is -1. And that's it. If you want to try, you can try it. Let's see. Well, let's try one that's a little bit smaller. Let's say I to the 10th. No, let's try I to the 11th. So I to the 11th is really equal to I to the 8th times I cubed. And the reason why is because I to the 8th goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which gives me 1. I cubed 1, 2, 3 equals -I. And sure enough, that's going to be your answer. Alright, like I said, watch this video twice and take notes the second